Guys, my name is Simmer. I'm the project and events manager for Teen Health 101, one of them. I'm in 10th grade and I'm from Washington, D.C. And a fun fact about me is that I've never cut my hair before. So yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so a little bit about Teen Health 101. We're just a youth-led nonprofit platform that basically focuses on creating multimedia and reliable resources about health, fitness, and science to educate and inform the youth. So when Valerie created Teen Health 101, she was basically searching the internet for reliable but easy to understand information regarding health, and she noticed a lack of that, and that's kind of why Teen Health 101 was created, to basically help teens and educate them in ways that we can actually understand. So if you want to learn more about what we do and our content, you can definitely check out our website. Here is the code, or you can even just go to teenhealth101.org. I'll just give you a second if you want to maybe take a look and scan the code. Aside from our website, we're also really active on Instagram. We post multiple times a week. So if you want to check out our content or stay updated on any other events that we have in the future, you should definitely follow us at Teen Health 101. And again, I'll just give you a second if you want to scan the QR code or if you want to take down the @ Okay, just a bit more about Teen Health 101. We actually have a really big team of over 400 members, and we're kind of split in ambassadors and content creators. So someone like me, I'm a content creator, so I help organize the event, and then our ambassadors are also a really big part of our team, and they basically help promote our event. So if you're interested in joining the team, again, make sure you follow us on Instagram and maybe check the website for our intake periods. And these are just some facts about our team. Again, we have over 400 members from 17 plus countries around the world. So we are pretty big, pretty diverse, and yeah, it's a really great community. Again, if you just want to check out our content, here's our QR code. And that's pretty much all for me. Thank you for listening to me talk, and I hope you guys enjoy the event. Justin, will you please take it over?
For sure. Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, I love answering questions. So feel free to fill up the chat and take advantage of that. There's definitely no dumb questions, especially when it comes to psychology and mental health. So, oh yeah, a little bit about my schooling, in case you want to be a psychologist and you're interested in that, of like, what does it take to be a psychologist? Do I have to go to school for the rest of my life? The short answer is yes. No, I'm kidding. But most people, and this was my path, I got a BA in psychology. That's one of the most common degrees that I'll talk about here in a little bit. You can also get a BS in psychology. But I went to Kent State University. That's in Northeast Ohio. That's where I grew up, in just outside of Akron, Ohio. Some of you know that because of LeBron James. That's where he's from. We did graduate the same year in high school. We went to different high schools, and he did come in when I worked at Pacific Sunwear. I thought it was super cool, and he came into the store once, and that was like peak living for me. But after I got my bachelor's degree, I got my master's degree, which is not something you have to do to become a psychologist. A lot of people go from bachelor's right into a doctorate field of study. But I got a master's degree mainly because I didn't know, like in psychology, there's so many things you can do. A lot of people just think you're a therapist, but some people are researchers, some people are professors, some people work for different agencies like the government, the prison system. So there's a lot of different things you can do within psychology. And for me, I'm like, I don't know what I want to do. So I'm going to get a master's degree, which will open doors for different doctoral fields of study. I decided I wanted to be a therapist. Turned out to be a real good choice because I love being a therapist. It's so much fun. But I got my master's degree actually down here where I live now at Florida Atlantic University, which is in Boca Raton, Florida. And then I got my doctorate degree and my PhD at Auburn University in Alabama in counseling psychology, which a lot of people are like, oh, what's counseling psychology? Counseling psychology and clinical psychology are essentially the same degree. It's just they have different histories. Counseling psychology was rooted in understanding positive benefits of mental health and basically what makes people thrive and what helps people get into careers they really like. And clinical psychology's history is more in how do we fix what's wrong with people? kind of what you think of, like with depression, schizophrenia, anxiety. But nowadays, you pretty much learn the exact same thing. So a little bit of a difference between those two. So common questions, and these are definitely common questions. Do specific university programs help you becoming a psychologist? Yes. The most common path is to get in undergrad is to get a bachelor's in psychology. Some people study sociology. That's a very close and related field. Some people in the university offer social work. All three of those are the top kind of undergraduate degrees if you want to be a psychologist. People can study other things and still get into master's programs and even sometimes doctorate programs in psychology by not getting an undergrad degree in those. Like maybe they thought they were going to go like pre-med and they got like a biology degree. So it's not to say if you don't have one of those three degrees, you can't be a psychologist, but those are the most common: psychology, sociology, and social work. What does a typical day look like? This is, oh my gosh, this varies so day to day. Especially because a lot of what I do is create content for social media. That's a huge part of how I make a living and where my passion is, breaking mental health stigma, especially on TikTok and Instagram. But a typical day for me in the morning is responding to a lot of emails, emails from potential clients, emails from clients I currently work with, scheduling clients. Because I work in private practice, which means I basically work for myself, I have to do everything. I could definitely hire somebody to do a lot of the things, but I'm used to doing them. So I schedule people. Of course, you have to write clinical notes after I do a session. So a lot of my days are in note taking, but the rest is basically doing therapy. I do online therapy just like this in the state I'm licensed in, which is Florida for now. I'm hoping to expand that this year. But I'll do online therapy and then I'll go to my office and meet with people in person. And I primarily work with teens. Teens and young adults make up most of my caseload. So it's a very high social field. But I got asked this on Instagram today and they're like, can an introvert, like somebody who's more introverted, be a therapist? And I think the majority of therapists are actually introverts, which is really interesting. And I think because a lot of introverts really like the patience of sitting with themselves, being insightful, learning about themselves. And extroverts can be out there like absorbing a lot of energy. So there's pros and cons, like depending on your personality type. I'm definitely an extrovert, but it bodes well for me in a high social field. What do you enjoy most about your job? This is what I'll pitch to anybody. If you're thinking about being a therapist or a psychologist, you form very meaningful relationships with people. Like unlike some, medical fields where you might see somebody once, maybe you see them twice. Within this field, on being a therapist, you see people usually for a while. It's rare that you'd only see somebody once or twice. If you only saw them once or twice, they might not have liked you that much. Or they might have like had something change in their life and now that issue they were dealing with is better. But you form like long relationships. Like right now, I think the longest person that I'm still currently working with, I've been working with them for over 6 years. Like that's a long time. And I haven't even been in the field for that long yet. So it's really cool though, because you get to hear their story, their narrative, and follow them through life. It's super awesome. But the other thing I'd say that I enjoy most is it's super interesting. Human beings are like the most interesting thing. We live really crazy, wild, interesting lives. And especially when people talk to you openly about what they're going through and what they're dealing with, man, it is super interesting. And I know I keep using that word because there's literally no other way I can describe it. It's not boring. There's so many other jobs out there that maybe you're like, oh, this is kind of boring or whatever. Being a therapist is never boring. There is always something that you're like, I cannot believe that happened. But it makes it really rewarding, especially when you see people in lows, going through tough times, being stuck. It's so awesome to share in their story and help them get better. That is such a rewarding aspect of it, of course. Those are all really good questions. Oh, my story. Yeah. So my story, like a lot of people that get into psychology or want to be a therapist, is you go through some difficult times. I had early life trauma. My dad died of brain cancer when I was 19. My brother was diagnosed with bipolar type 1 disorder when he was only 13. And me and him were only separated by a year and a half. And so I would watch him like growing up, like he got in a lot of trouble, and mainly because he wasn't getting the mental health care that he needed. Mental health growing up like in the early 90s through the mid 90s just wasn't talked about as much as it is today. And so he ended up passing away when I was 23 years old. So losing my dad and my brother really made me know that I want to be a therapist. I want to help other people. So going through my own grief, going through my own trauma was really a lot of it. It's a thing I preach a lot. I was a terrible high school student. I was not good. Because I was going through everything like in my home life, I just didn't care about much. I didn't care. I was that kind of classic student. I'm like, who cares? Like everything is stupid. Everything sucks. So I didn't put any effort in at all, like through high school. And even so, like I remember graduating high school and somebody told me, they're like, you may be able to get into like one university, but you might want to explore other options. It's so weird to think about that now, like having a doctorate degree that I went to school basically as long as I could. But what I learned when I went to undergrad is, your motivation is a huge aspect, and your motivation gets zapped if you're going through trauma, if you're going through mental health difficulties, if your family life is sort of chaotic. So being at a university and be able to create, my own narrative and learning how to learn, like helped me so much. And I was like, oh, I'm not stupid. Like I can learn anything. I just got to put the effort in and take the time. Yeah, so I use those early life experiences to really propel me into this field. For a while through undergrad, I was doing psychology and broadcasting is so much fun, which weirdly now led me today to do a lot of like social media stuff, which is so engaging. And I did a little bit of acting, which I love too. But it's weird if like you can have all your interests in life and find a way to kind of bring them all together, no matter what career you choose. And I feel like now, like in my mid 30s, I'm really making that happen, which is fun. Final words. These are really near and dear to my heart. I just felt like final words felt so like strong, but don't ever believe your story is over. And especially when you're younger, like if I could talk to my 15-year-old self, 16-year-old self, 17-year-old self, I would really want to say this, like, this is a small chapter in a very long story for you. And it doesn't feel that way. Like if you go through years of your life, like in a difficulty, maybe keeping certain truths to yourself, keeping your suffering to yourself, it could feel like this is all life will ever be. And I can't explain enough that like this will be a small chapter in a much longer story. And this storm for you can and typically does pass if we give it enough time. But I no matter what setbacks you have, I just don't want you to forget, like you're always changing, you're always growing. And the hard thing about that is you have to be around long enough to see that things are always changing. But again, like I know a lot of teenagers, because of the family they come from, sometimes the culture they come from, they don't get mental health help. Like that's rejected for them. And so what I want you to know is like things can feel a lot better for you, even if right now they definitely don't.
All right, thank you, Justin, for your inspirational and educational presentation. So now we're just going to move on to the Q&A session. So at this point, if you have any questions for Justin, please feel free to leave them in the chat, and Simmer will just read them out loud to Justin. And so yeah, if you have any questions, please ask away.
Okay, so our first question is by Alana, and she asked, how much do you make hourly? Does it depend whether or not you have patients?
That's an awesome question. So for me, since I work in private practice, meaning like I work for myself, like that's not something everybody does who becomes a psychologist. You can work for different agencies. Like before I worked at the university, I worked in their medical counseling center, and that I had a salary. So that I got paid whether I was seeing somebody like one-on-one or not. Like my role there at the university was to be a therapist, but also do outreach, run groups. So it didn't matter whether I was seeing somebody or not. And the typical salary when you first start coming out as a psychologist, and again, this is a big range, can be anywhere from like, again, for your first year, 50,000 on the low, all the way up to like 80,000 on the high. But psychology is one of those fields that you can increase quickly. Like within 3, 4, 5 years post, a lot of people have 20, 30, $40,000 more jumped onto that. This is just me throwing out big ranges. Like on the high end, like if you work in your own private practice, you can easily go deep into 6 figures. For me, like the hourly rate you charge depends on your state and your community. So where I live, the average hourly rate per session that someone would charge with a doctorate degree is $250 an hour. So I don't charge that because I'm from the Midwest, and that just feels like a lot to me. But I have friends and colleagues down here that do what I do, and they charge $250 an hour. So you can imagine that adds up very, very quickly. But like many things, when you first come out of school, most people aren't jumping into those higher salary. You build reputations from doing good work, from helping people, and that gets you more clients. So early on, what you're trying to do is show that I can be a good therapist, connect with you, help you through your difficulties, because then every person you help spreads the word about you, and then that helps get more clients and more referrals. But if you live in a place, I'll just throw out one more example. If you live in a place like a small town, that hourly rate might be very different because cost of living is different. Where I live, cost of living is high. It's expensive to live in South Florida. But like a therapist like in Michigan, the average rate might be like $140 an hour, which is still substantial when you do math. So yeah, that's some of the stuff about salary and payment.
Yeah, that's great. Our next question is from Jasmine. She asks, what kind of opportunities would you recommend for people who are interested in psychology? What about for high school students?
Yeah, and this is like the first thing. If you could take whatever psychology classes your high school offers, absorb them. And I know sometimes high schools don't. And I know sometimes they just offer like Psych 101, which is like cool. See if you're interested in it. Because I say this all the time. You might like the idea of becoming a therapist, but if you can't get through the coursework, if it's not interesting to you, like it's just going to be really hard to go through those years of schooling. Which I'll definitely talk about more of how many years that really is. At a minimum, it's usually to become a psychologist with a Ph.D., it's 9 years, and that includes undergrad. But it can take more than that depending if you get a master's or not. Wow, I talked so much, I lost the original question. Oh, other opportunities. Volunteering, joining mental health organizations is always a good thing. NAMI is a really popular one, but if your school has a mental health organization, if you can join any of these more global national mental health organizations, that always looks good because it shows you're interested, you want to help. And even doing volunteer work can be, again, look really great, especially at the high school level.
Okay, awesome. Our next question is from Valerie. She asks, other than being a therapist, what other jobs can psychologists do?
Yeah, such a good question. So the other major ones that I'll talk about, like more niche ones, are researcher. And researchers, again, like the ceiling can be really high as far as salary, but it's so interesting as well. Like you're doing groundbreaking research to understand like what areas of your brain light up under anxiety and what can we do like intervention wise to light up other portions of the brain that might slow you down and make you more restful or peaceful. Like research drives everything in the field of psychology, and some people really love it. I thought research was really cool. I just couldn't see myself doing it day in and day out for a living. The other is being a professor, which is teaching at the university level. A lot of professors are also researchers, but some people just really love teaching. Teaching's so much fun, especially if you're talking about something you really like. But aside from those, some people work for the government. They work for the FBI. Some people get hired and work for businesses, because if you can understand human behavior, psychology, what makes people tick, businesses will love to hire you on to figure out how you can help them with their marketing and help them drive more income. So the amount of places I know, like I have friends that I graduated with that work for the military, work for the prison system, work for businesses, some are professors. I feel like we are all over the place, but that is the cool thing. When you know a lot about human behavior, somebody's going to want to hire you for something. It's more of like, where does your interest lie?
Yeah, that makes sense. Our next question is from Anushka. She asks, how did or did not your passions like acting and broadcasting help you become a better therapist?
Oh man, that's a super, no one's ever asked me that. That's a really good question. It certainly helps me a lot in making like TikTok videos and like mental health videos, because like I try to get information across that's interesting and engaging versus just me like hitting record and just talking at you for 30 seconds about psychology. I try to incorporate things that are like attention grabbing, but also like, oh, that's interesting. Like he just played out what that might look like in therapy. But I think it can help you, it can definitely help you be more sympathetic towards others. Like when you do act, like, right, you try to embody that character, what they've been through, what their background is. That is everything on being a therapist. Like if you don't have to have similar experiences of the people you help, but you have to sympathize and mentalize and understand what they've been through. Because if you don't see the world through their lens or try to, it's really, really hard to help someone. Because like if I just like project my life and my views onto you, that's not going to be really helpful for your story and what you've been through and what your interests are. So mentalizing, that definitely comes into play with the whole acting background.
And that leads us to our next question by Rain. How do you emotionally cope with hearing other stories, especially if they mirror your own trauma or experiences?
Wow, you hit like, so what you just hit there is the hardest by far, is when they mirror your own trauma. I've certainly worked with people who have lost their father from cancer or had their brother or sibling die of a drug overdose, as mine did. Those are the most difficult, but what it highlights is, have you done your own work? It's important that we have our emotions. There's nothing wrong with feeling something. But if as a therapist, I'm leaving the room, like quote unquote, like going into my mind, starting to dissociate or think about things that are more to do with me and not to do with you, I'm not helping you anymore. So if that starts happening a lot in therapy, it would highlight to me, man, I got to do my own work. I got to get my own therapy. I got to talk about my trauma more. But overall, because you get so much training on how to be a therapist, how to help people, when you sit down in that chair, I stand up a lot because my back, sitting hurts your back is what I've learned on being a therapist, sitting long term. But when you lock into that role, you are so using all those years of schooling and education that you really fit into that mold of like, I'm here to help them, even if what I'm hearing is really distressing. It doesn't hit you the same way as like if your best friend came to you and was talking about something distressful. Like I can't explain it another way of like in the therapist role, it feels protective because you're like, dang, like they just said this. It feels like putting together a puzzle that you've learned through school. So that feels really good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Our next question is, how did you start your private practice business?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I started it right before COVID. I was like, I'm done working at the university. I'm going out on my own. And literally a month later, COVID hit. It was like, oh no. But my plan from the beginning was to make content on social media. And luckily, I had a friend that was like, dude, quit making YouTube videos. You should make TikTok videos. I'm like, TikTok. I'm like, there's gonna be nobody over the age of 25 on TikTok. And this again was pre-COVID, where like before everybody flocked to TikTok. But I started making videos on TikTok, and it totally changed things and got me a lot of exposure for somebody, like getting to share, like, hey, I'm a therapist, I'm out here, like I'd love to help you, this is what I work with. So that really helped me build my private practice. A lot of other ways you build is to connect with medical doctors and be like, hey, if anyone comes in with anxiety, I'd love to help them. Like, these are the more traditional ways you create those collaborations and connections, like where you live. But for me, like, it's just social media.
Okay, cool. Our next question is from Valeska. They say, I'm going to be a senior this year and I'm looking at colleges at the moment, and I'm a straight A student, but I'm stressing out about not standing out as much. Do you have any advice? What community service can I do in order to relate back to psychology?
Well, not to therapize what you just said, but that can be a chronic thing for people, of kind of like, and this might not relate to you at all, but sometimes, like, no matter what you do, you kind of just feel like, I need to do more. And I worry about that, especially for like my Gen Z peeps out there. Y'all have so much that you've had to endure and go through. I worry about that chronic, like, thriving, like, I got to be better, I got to be more special, because y'all, most of you have done more than enough. And I worry about burnout. I worry about like feeling like that chronic imposter syndrome of like, I'm never going to be good enough. And you just keep doing more and more, and you get away from who I am and being grounded in yourself. You can always volunteer. You can always join organizations. You can always talk about your interests. Like, people minimize that. Like, if you have a huge interest in anything, like I love skateboarding, I was just skateboarding before this. Like, if you have an interest and a passion in something, it says something about you. It doesn't mean other people are going to share in that, but it shows that you put your energy towards something other than just studying in just school all the time. I think that can show like you're a more like holistic person. But again, like, I worry about chronically, especially with teens, feeling like they constantly have to do more.
Yeah, Herschel asks a question. What's the hardest part of your job, or something that you don't like doing in particular?
I know a Herschel. I wonder if that's the Herschel I know. The hardest part, the paperwork in clinical note writing is so boring. I'm not, if you interviewed like, 100 therapists, I would bet 90 of them would say how much they hate the clinical note writing. It's boring as heck. And you do it by yourself, and it's in very like, not just like legal speak, but technical speak, because it's the way you're trained to write the note. It just isn't, it's not fun, but you have to do that after the end of every session. It doesn't take a ton of time, but it's just really boring work. And it's just part of the job. Aside from that, it's the reality of like, sometimes you work with people and they get worse. It's just a part of the job. They go through depressive episodes. They have bouts of suicidality. They might need to be hospitalized at times. No therapist likes that. We would love to believe like every single person I work with, they're only going to get better. That's not the truth with mental health. Some people do get worse. And it's not necessarily anything you did or didn't do. It's just life. But that's always hard, always.
That's a great answer. Daisy asks, thank you for speaking today. I'm a current graduate counseling psychology student. Why did you decide to go for your PhD, and how long after you received your master's did you decide to go for your PhD?
I knew right away, like when I was finishing my master's, that I wanted, because I was doing a lot of research in my 2-year master program. And I was like, for me, this isn't what I want to do every day. And I also got to teach a little bit. I'm like, oh, I like that though. Teaching was cool. But for me, I was like, I want to get the doctorate degree, because if you get a doctorate degree, you can teach, you can do research, and you can be a therapist. With a master's degree, typically you just do therapy. You're a therapist, which is awesome. And that's mostly what I do now, which is ironic. So I say this a lot. You don't always need to get a doctorate degree. You can get a master's degree and be an awesome therapist out there killing it, loving life. It's just kind of how many doors you want open for you. And now I totally went off and like lost the question. What was it again?
The question was, why did you decide to go for your PhD?
Yeah. That was mainly it. I knew I liked teaching. I knew I wanted most of my like more doors open for me. But I say this a lot, and I still stand by it. Like if I knew this is what I'd be doing, like, you know, now I probably would have got a master's in mental health counseling or clinical psychology or something like that, and might not have gotten a PhD. Just because I teach a little bit, I don't do any research. So it wasn't bad getting a doctorate degree. Some people are like, oh, it's so long and whatever. I had a great time. I love studying. I love the people I met. But I could have definitely just done a 3-year master's program in mental health counseling and been out doing what I do right now. So who knows?
Wow, that's really interesting. And our last question for today comes from Kritika. She asks, I've heard that people who have mental illnesses themselves, such as depression, have a harder time getting a career in the psychology field. Is that true?
Oh, I've never heard that before. I wonder if that's a myth. And there's lots of myths about a lot of professions. I've actually never heard that. I thought you were going to go the other way. I thought you were going to say that people with mental health difficulties become therapists. That I was going to say, yes, is absolutely true. I have OCD. So aside from the trauma I've been through, a lot of my family members have OCD that got passed on to me in my biology. And I've had to go to therapy to learn how best to manage my OCD. So I would say it's definitely not true that people with mental health difficulties have a hard time becoming a therapist. Especially, again, it's all about doing your own work. If you get your own therapy and you do your own healing, in fact, I'd argue that's going to make you a better therapist than somebody who's never had a mental health difficulty, because you just can't really get it. Like you don't really relate.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for putting all your questions in the chat. And thank you to Justin for answering them. So before we end off the event, we're actually going to take a quick gallery picture. So if you're comfortable with turning your camera on, feel free to do so. And I'll just take a quick screenshot. So yeah, we can do that now. Again, if you feel comfortable, feel free to turn your camera on. And this will just be used for some of the graphics for the event.
Rafia, did you want me to take the picture or?
I can take it, no worries. Oh, everybody, hello. Nice to see everybody's faces.
Hey, this is just like when I teach at the university. Cameras pop on when they have to, but otherwise, no.
I'll just give everybody another moment. All right, so if we're good to go, I'll count to 3 and then I'll take the picture, okay? So you can make your best pose. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Take another one, 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you so much. So yeah, before we just end off the event, I just want to say a big thank you to Justin for taking time out of his day to be here today. And I want to thank all of you guys for attending this event. It really means a lot to me and the entire Teen Health 101 community. If you have any questions, you can feel free to email us at teenhealth101.org. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Thank you again, everybody, for coming, and all the materials, the slideshow, everything will be emailed out to you guys. So thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Goodbye.
Bye. All right, so if you're here, you're probably an ambassador, so you're here for our exclusive ambassador Q&A. So yeah, if you have any questions for Justin, we'll just stick around for maybe 10 more minutes, and yeah, Justin can just answer your questions if you have any. You can also feel free to unmute yourselves because we are a smaller group this time, whatever you want to do.
How was the financial journey along all this, degrees that you got?
That's an awesome question. So, yeah, scholarships, loans, all those things come into play. And so for me, since